Hello there, friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. When the Clone Wars ended the first time around, Ahsoka Tano's future was uncertain. Her last appearance was in the last episode of the 5th season, and I still remember the pit in my stomach as the cellos kicked in and she slowly walked away from the Jedi Temple, and more importantly, her master Anakin. The year was 2011. I remember pinching myself, wondering how I'd come to care so much for this character, who just years earlier was grating and annoying to me and on the cusp of ruining a terrific Star Wars adventure featuring Anakin Skywalker and his bro Obi-Wan Kenobi. I wondered to myself, how had I come to care so much about this relationship? It must have been the strings. When sound is properly paired with the right imagery, it's always kicked in the feels for me. So that clip I just showed you was the last scene of the 5th season. So imagine waiting an entire year after that happens, and then the 6th season comes and the 6th season goes by, and it's not really until the second and last episode that we see Ahsoka again, and it's really only Ahsoka in a Force vision that Yoda's having.
Told me I would finish my training and become a Jedi, but the Council expelled me. Why would you do that? Will I still become one with the Force when I die?
That's your classic Sith mindfuck. And basically after that, we wouldn't see Ahsoka return until the Rebels series a few years later. And I think for many fans, Ahsoka Tano is frozen in time. She's still the young snips we all grew up with, and a hot-headed teenager, one of the few individuals who can talk Anakin Skywalker down from his rage, and one of the only Jedi strong enough to keep up with him. And I think for a lot of us older fans out there, seeing Ahsoka Tano first in The Mandalorian and definitely in the first few episodes of Ahsoka as a much more matured individual is a bit jarring. Yes, I think Filoni was a bit over the top with his direction in the first episode of the series, especially in the tomb scene. Like, no one in their right mind moves that slowly. I entirely blame this on Filoni's animation background. In animation, you can go completely ham when it comes to drama and character action, and you can get away with it, but in live action, you gotta be more subtle. But it's not just the acting. Ahsoka also seems more quiet and reserved and just not as spirited as she once was. Now, I'm gonna defend Dave Filoni and Rosario Dawson for taking this character in this direction. You see, Ahsoka was born in 36 BBY, and so now in this Ahsoka series, she's 47 years old. She's basically a middle-aged woman, and she's seen a lot. You can't really expect her to act the same way she did all those years ago when she was a teenager. I remember being a teenager, and honestly, I was a danger to society. I should not have been allowed to do half the things that I did. But this is my character arc. I've matured a little bit, I like to think, and Ahsoka also has her character arc. In my opinion, it's a wonderful and carefully thought out character arc that is perhaps one of the greatest and most detailed in Star Wars history. We can all grow attached to Ahsoka in certain moments of time and certain phases in our life, but she is a living character, one that needs to develop. If she didn't have development and was completely flat, well, she just wouldn't be that interesting. And more importantly, Ahsoka represents a new type of Jedi in her mid-age. One that we always knew existed, and something we're now seeing on screen for the first time in the Ahsoka series. And Rosario Dawson, despite a few bad scenes here and there, has really nailed it, in my opinion. Whereas during the Clone Wars, Ahsoka was more like a rogue with her dual wielding and rapid movements. Now the more methodic and experienced Ahsoka moves with the patience and weight of a seasoned samurai. She even has a finishing move fit for one of Kurosawa's favorite actors, Toshiro Mifune. Peter Ramsey, who directed the epic 4th episode of Ahsoka, admits that Ahsoka's finishing move against the Inquisitor Merrick is a direct ripoff of the Kurosawa film Sanjuro from 1962, in which Toshiro Mifune's character Sanjuro is pestered by another samurai who really wants to fight him. Mifune ultimately indulges the samurai and dispatches him extremely quickly, releasing a fountain of blood as a result. If I recall correctly, there was a malfunction with the mechanism that was supposed to shoot out blood, and so a fountain came out instead of a smaller spurt, but they just kept it in the final cut anyway, and now it's a famous scene. Of course, Merrick only spews out green gas, but just like the samurai pestering Sanjuro, Merrick wasn't even close to being at Ahsoka's level. I mean, the nods towards samurai culture in Ahsoka's own story are everywhere. Just take a look at Ahsoka's lightsaber hilts post-Order 66. They look exactly like a katana hilt. They're not cylindrical like a traditional lightsaber, and she even has a Shoto blade in her offhand. There's also this epic scene between Ahsoka and Baylan Skoll, who holds his sword like a medieval knight wearing plate armor, giving us that classic feudal samurai versus medieval knight matchup that rarely ever makes it to the big screen, but has been the subject of many late-night conversation between friends sharing a brew or some bud. And this has a lot to do with Filoni. This has Filoni written all over it. See, Filoni was tutored directly underneath George Lucas, and Lucas taught Filoni a lot about cinema, about how to use live-action film standards in animation. Lucas also taught Filoni the message of Star Wars and how to build worlds like he does. Dave Filoni actually talks about how he relates to the character of Ahsoka, who was being tutored and mentored by Anakin Skywalker. He really understood Ahsoka a lot because he was essentially the Padawan of George Lucas. He also really likes tube tops. This is sort of what brought the Clone Wars to the next level. I mean, the drama, the scenery, especially in the later seasons, are what you would expect from a film. And while George Lucas had a lot of shortcomings as a creator, cinematography has always been a strength of his, as is world building. And to achieve the look he wanted, to achieve the vibe and flavor of Star Wars, George Lucas actually had to borrow from a lot of real-life culture and mysticism, including a lot of Eastern culture. And we see that nowhere clearer than the Ahsoka series, which is really just the tale of a Ronin trying to find their way through the galaxy. What is a Ronin? Well, it's a term that dates back to feudal Japan, and it refers to a drifter or a wanderer, someone without a master or a home, and more specifically, a samurai without a master. Now, the samurai are one of the clearer warrior influences behind a lot of these Star Wars characters. Ralph McQuarrie's Darth Vader helm and armor design was said to have been inspired by the armor of the legendary samurai Date Masamune. And just like the various sects of Force users in Star Wars, the samurai were a pretty diverse group of individuals. Some propagandists would like you to think that the samurai were just noble warriors that always followed a strict code. But the reality is, it really depended on which era you're talking about and who the samurai fought for. I mean, there were plenty of cowardly, thieving samurai who were no better than bandits throughout Japanese history. Now, at their core, the samurai were a part of the warrior officer caste in medieval Japan, and they worked directly for a daimyo.
It is the new daimyo Boba Fett, Your Excellence.
Daimyos were feudal lords, and they took care of and cultivated their hereditary lands. They were subordinate to the emperor, but also the shogun, with the commander-in-chief of military forces. These daimyos were required to contribute warriors for any larger national military campaigns. Now, Japanese culture to this day is heavily focused on tradition and rules. Just like the Jedi during the Golden Age of the Republic, the samurai were no different. The creation of the samurai class during the Kamakiri period was not just an attempt to create a professional soldier caste. It was also designed to spread this image of the ideal soldier and citizen, something that all people can look up to and trust. Like the Jedi, these individuals were trained from childhood in the arts of warfare, but instead of just using a sword, the samurai also were skilled with a yari, or spear, and the yumi, or bow. The rules that the samurai fought varied from one era to another and depended on who they fought for. There have been attempts again to romanticize the samurai and their adherence to the Bushido Code and martial honor, just like how some fans and creators romanticize the Jedi's role in the Clone Wars. But the reality is, war is war. And Ki-Adi-Mundi was an absolute savage talking potato who loved using flamethrowers on sentient beings. Generally speaking, people who try to be really honorable in war don't get to procreate and spread their knowledge. And let me tell you, Ki-Adi-Mundi procreated a lot. The samurai in reality were as treacherous and cunning and cowardly as any other soldier in human history, and they also didn't always follow the rules. For instance, samurai who were engaged in dishonorable acts or failed to do their duty were given a choice of committing seppuku, or ritual suicide, in order to retain their honor in death. I mean, this is heavily romanticized. A lot of times, seppuku was forced upon individuals. It was an alternative to execution. It's basically like saying to someone at gunpoint, you can either pull the trigger yourself or we'll do it for you. I mean, it's not much of a choice, is it? And according to the Bushido Code, a samurai was also supposed to commit seppuku upon the loss of his master. And to not do so was considered a great crime and a very shameful act. This is actually where the term Ronin came from in the first place. You see, being a masterless samurai was seen as a very dangerous thing, and that's because masters, daimyos, generally kept the samurai in line and disciplined them when necessary and gave them work and food so they didn't create chaos. Throughout history, when a military force is disbanded, if those young men are not reintegrated into society shortly after and given purpose, then great social upheaval usually follows thanks to these unemployed soldiers. And yes, Ronins in Japanese history took part in many famous uprisings and revolutions. Daimyos, shoguns had a good reason to fear a masterless samurai. If you think about it, Count Dooku, who also left the Jedi Order, started his own separatist crisis, which caused a lot of destruction as well. So the Jedi Order, just like these daimyos and shoguns, were fearful of these outcasts as well. The only difference is when a Jedi Knight or Master dies, their Padawan wasn't kicked out of the Order or anything like that. That's kind of extreme. But in specific cases, like in the case with Ahsoka Tano, some Jedi were kicked out. In Ahsoka's case, it was a matter of politics. She had been framed for the Jedi Temple bombing, but because the Jedi were given a right of prosecution for their own members, a right, let's be honest, they had no business of accepting, and completely destroyed the checks and balances between the various branches of government. And so the Jedi were placed in a difficult position. If they just pardoned Ahsoka for the Jedi Temple bombing, the public would view this as the Order protecting and harboring a terrorist. And so the Jedi kind of wanted Ahsoka to be tried by the Republic government, and because Ahsoka was technically a military commander in the Grand Army of the Republic, that would mean a military tribunal. In order for her to fall under Republic jurisdiction, she had to actually be kicked out of the Jedi Order. And this is why Ahsoka has the unique distinction of being a Ronin, because unlike Count Dooku, she did not leave. Well, she kind of did leave eventually, but she was originally kicked out by the Jedi Order. And so seppuku was this prescription for the disease that was losing your status as a samurai. Without a master to take care of them, a samurai was no different from a bandit in a lot of ways. And I think the individuals who created this policy were probably pretty out of touch, you know? These are daimyos and shoguns that they didn't really think much of their warriors, maybe. I mean, Japanese people aren't aliens. They're humans through and through, just like the rest of us, and they don't want to follow their masters into the afterlife. I mean, you guys have heard of, you know, those Egyptian tombs being open and you see nail scratches on the inside from some unlucky servant or concubine that didn't want to go down with their master. And so this refusal to kill oneself after their master dies is what leads to the creation of this Ronin class. Now, these former warriors were discriminated and shamed due to their status, ironically, by other samurai and, you know, daimyos. They probably viewed the Ronin not only as dishonorable, but also as bad luck, a reminder of what could happen to them one day. The rigidness of certain aspects of Japanese culture and its inability to see the individual or see the larger picture is something the Jedi share as well. Instead of just being human and bending the rules sometimes, the Jedi always clung onto their dogma and created monsters like Anakin Skywalker. And because these samurai were not allowed to join a new daimyo, they basically had to figure out ways to make money on their own. But because samurai were actually not allowed to take other professions, this meant they had to figure out a way to make money with their swords. There weren't many options left. Some would become bodyguards, others would protect trade caravans. Some would even become bandits and organize with other Ronin. You know, Ahsoka has her own period of wandering, or, you know, being a Ronin, and this happens right after she gets kicked out of the Jedi Order. She actually ventures down to the lower levels of Coruscant, and she finds herself in the company of some colorful characters, two spice trading sisters looking to get rich quick. They're probably a bit kinder than your average criminal scum from the lower levels, but Ahsoka essentially served as their hired muscle, using her mechanic skills and more importantly her fighting skills to keep these girls safe. You know, Japanese culture really only has two modes. When things are good, they tend to be super conservative and they don't tolerate any type of progress or innovation. But when things get a bit difficult, they embrace extreme change in order to bring balance to society once again. There's really no middle ground, and I think this is what makes Japanese culture and society so unique and interesting. During the Sengoku period in the 15th and 16th century, for instance, Japan endured almost constant civil war and upheaval, which led to a depletion of samurai forces and the deaths of many daimyos. And so, surprise, the Ronin were allowed to rejoin with other daimyos, and you know, some samurai would even have 10 masters throughout their entire lives. In general, the connection between a vassal and a lord during this time period was far looser than other periods, and unsatisfied samurai were known for defecting to the other side if he and his men were not treated right or being poorly led. And so during this period of time, recruiting a Ronin into your ranks was completely fine. That silly old tradition didn't even matter during this time period. Kind of like in the last moments of the Clone Wars, the Republic was so desperate for more commanders as their forces were spread out thin and engaged on multiple fronts during the Clone Wars endgame known as the Outer Rim Siege. And so Ahsoka Tano was invited back into the fold, and they asked her to basically join the retaking of Mandalore. But chaotic times leads to chaotic results, and it turns out the Siege of Mandalore was one big trap. It brought Ahsoka back to the Republic just in time to enjoy Order 66. And let me tell you guys, Ahsoka's Order 66 was exceptionally messed up because she was given command of the 332nd Company, a detachment of the 501st, which had fought under her command numerous times during the Clone Wars. They were ecstatic to see their old commander return, and as a result, they painted her face onto their helmets. And so yeah, Ahsoka Tano spent her Order 66 running away from a bunch of clone troopers with her face on their helmet trying to kill her. And she ends up killing almost all of them, which I'm sure messed her up even more. So all of you people complaining about, you know, Ahsoka being melancholy and quiet, you know, walk a few miles in her shoes before you judge her. Ahsoka Tano truly captures the Ronin spirit. She's pretty cynical, she's experienced, and she's practical. She's an individual who has seen the stupidity of her former code and the regulations that used to govern her way of life. She also captures the more romantic version of the Ronin story, a wronged individual who is a vengeful spirit. Like the 47 samurai whose master was sentenced to death for pulling the sword on a powerful but corrupt court official known as Kira Yoshinaka. These 47 samurai would turn into Ronin, and they would actually wait for almost 2 years carefully planning their revenge. One night they would break into Kira's estate and kill him. After a few years of wandering the galaxy, a bit lost, after Order 66, Ahsoka eventually also finds her purpose. Ahsoka would eventually embrace the role of fulcrum and began aiding the rebellion in their fight against the Empire. Although Ahsoka's view of the Jedi Order never recovered, and ever since then, Ahsoka has been a beacon of light and hope for those who oppose authoritarianism and oppression in this galaxy. So, as you can see, Ahsoka is clearly a Ronin, and I think that's a really cool character type to have a Jedi as in Star Wars. Kind of geeking out a little bit. Anyway, let me know in the comment section below what you think about my connection from Ahsoka to the Ronin character type. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, and my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.